What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today's the day. I hope you bear with me because these are never super easy conversations to have. Everyone's been asking, Andy, what would you do? Should they bring back Aaron Rodgers? Should they try to trade him? What's going to happen? All those sort of things. So this is going to be one of those fun ones that I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on what I would do this offseason. As usually, I will preface this with, this will be an opportunity for you to say, well, Andy, I'm glad you're not the GM. And again, rightfully so. I'm glad I'm not as well. Certainly have a lot of faith in Russ Ball and Brian Gutekunst. But part of what's fun about all of this is these conversations, these potential, ideas of what could happen, what should happen, etc. To me, and I'm sure to a lot of you that are listening to this, that's what puts all of the pieces of this entire 365-day-a-year NFL process together. It's not just what happens on the field. It's not just, wins and losses. It's all encompassing, right? This is what makes sports so much fun, is you get to have all of this conjecture over who's going to stay and who's going to go and how the team is going to be made for next year, which then springs all of this hope and the draft and free agency, right? Everything has this level of sort of excitement to it in the offseason, even when things maybe don't go according to plan or you're set to lose a lot of players that are important to the team. To me, this is still all part of the fun process of 365-day-a-year football and having a 365-day-a-year podcast. So let's go through this. Again, some of you are certainly going to disagree with the direction that I would go here, and it's understandably so. And Green Bay's in a really tough situation, and I'm going to get to that very specifically in just a moment. But what I want to start with here, before I go step for step in exactly how I would handle this offseason, it's really important to understand windows. Yes, windows. So what I mean here is opening up potential championship windows. And what's even more important sometimes is knowing when it's time to close a window or transition to a different window or work towards opening up a brighter, better window in the future. I think the days, for the most part, of a New England Patriots-esque dynasty where they just dominate for a long period of time are going to be behind us. I'm sure there will be an exception to the rule. I believe ultimately the Patriots will turn out to be an exception to the rule. However, I think what we're going to see, and especially as we start seeing more and more teams take these all-in approaches on any given season, we saw it with the Rams, obviously, this last season, Green Bay, the Saints have done it. You're going to see teams that are going to aggressively go in an all-in direction and open up a window for 2 or 3 years, try to win a Super Bowl, and then what's going to happen is those windows are going to get slammed shut pretty hard. Now, are the Chiefs going to be good for a while with Patrick Mahomes? Probably. Are the Bills going to be good for a while with Josh Allen? Probably. Are the Bengals going to be good for a while with Joe Burrow? Yes. If you have a really good young quarterback, you have the ability to open up those windows for a while. And those teams are going to be good for a while. But it's going to be when they take aggressive approaches that they're going to be at the top of their game. And we've even seen that to some extent, certainly with Kansas City, when they go out and get a Frank Clark and a Tyrann Mathieu and so on and so forth to bolster up that team the last couple years, right? Which gets them to a couple Super Bowls and ultimately wins one. We saw Tampa Bay go all in with Tom Brady. We saw the Rams go all in with Matthew Stafford. We are starting to see more and more of this, and it's a handful of teams every year that's going to start really doing this. It's going to put them in a position to be in a better position to win a Super Bowl than some of the teams that are not doing that. So you're going to have to see teams decide much more aggressively when they want to try to really open a window and go all in and borrow from the future and aggressively approach an opportunity to win a championship, or maybe where they're going to stay more status quo, take more of a Ted Thompson approach where, hey, we've got a young Aaron Rodgers. We're just going to try to be in the playoffs every year and hope that we hit one of these years with a Super Bowl. It worked one time. It didn't work the rest of the time. Or you're going to see teams that are going the opposite direction, completely understanding and taking a cue really from baseball on this and NBA as well, that, hey, if we're not going to be a really good playoff team, it probably behooves us to maybe almost close the window entirely, gain better draft picks, and start the process over at some point in the future. These are difficult decisions. And Green Bay, arguably right now, has the most difficult decision with trying to figure out whether or not they should close a window, open a window, etc., or not. And what I mean by that is they have a lot of equity already in this current roster. They're paying a ton to David Bakhtiari. They're paying a ton to Kenny Clark, right? Jair Alexander is going to get a long-term extension, and they're going to start paying him some serious money. They've got Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams on this team right now. They're paying Aaron Jones a ton of money as a running back. And we could go on and on. Like if you end up with Preston Smith back, he would get a pretty decent sized contract. You've got Rashawn Gary in his prime. Like you have a lot of things set up right now on this roster where even if you wanted to sort of go in the opposite direction and go all out, you have a lot of money tied up to some players, including some guys like a David Bakhtiari, who are getting up there in age and may not be able to help you quite as much if and when you can open another window in 4 to 5 years. And as I've mentioned right here on this podcast before, you can make a very strong argument that the best opportunity for Green Bay to win a Super Bowl in the next decade, regardless of what they do, is this year in 2022. Because you could have Rodgers and Adams and Aaron Jones and Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins and John Runyon Jr. and Kenny Clark and Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Adrian Amos, Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, maybe a Devondre Campbell or a Rasul Douglas. You could put together a pretty darn good team and arguably the best opportunity to win in the next 10 years. And that's why Green Bay has to make maybe the most difficult decision of all and say, hey, we're going to try to keep this together 1, maybe 2 more years as best we can. But we know that there's a law of diminishing returns. And first of all, the team that we put together this year isn't going to be as talented as the team we just had last year. Probably not even as talented as the one we had in 2020. So there's, again, you're on a sliding slope here. Doesn't mean they can't win the Super Bowl. They can, but it's going to be harder. And then the next year, it's going to be even probably worse than this year or the previous year, etc. So they're working against a time crunch because the salary cap's just going to get tighter and tighter around them, and especially as they keep moving all in and making these maneuvers. And it just, like I said, it's going to get tough. Now, on the flip side, as I mentioned, if they want to open up a new window and go in a totally different direction, they already have so much baked into this current roster and borrowed from the future. In a way, it's sort of hard to do that, and you're having some sunken cost by doing that is probably the best way I could say it. Because you might say, well, maybe you could trade some, like, it's really tough, right? Like Rashawn Gary and Jair Alexander are young enough. You don't want to trade those guys. Same thing with Kenny Clark. David Bakhtiari's contract is untradeable. Like you're not trading Elton Jenkins. He's young enough. Like you're just in, it's a sort of weird no man's land for the Packers where going all in probably isn't the best all option and going all out probably isn't the best option. So how do you weigh it out? And that's why I say at the beginning, at the onset, if you don't like my, 5-step plan here to what I think Green Bay should do, I get it, because there is no perfect calculus here and there's no perfect answer. You could try to go all in again and maybe you win a Super Bowl, maybe, but I think the odds are mostly going to be against you. It's not to say they can't, but you're probably looking at a very challenging road to the Super Bowl. But again, within the realm of possibility. So you could make a strong argument. Take that chance. Take that chance with Aaron Rodgers while you still have it, because you don't know what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. You just don't. So you could take that opportunity. And I like I said before, I would not argue hard against that if that's the route that you want to take. If you said you wanted to go in a different direction and said, listen, we just had 3 great opportunities with Aaron Rodgers in this team. If those 3 teams didn't get it done, what makes you think the next 2, years are maybe going to get it done? I understand that as well. And that's why, again, Green Bay is a little bit in no man's land here. And the other thing that I want to mention here before I really get into everything is that there is safety and security in what you're doing now. And that means a lot. And what I mean by that is Russ Ball and Brian Gutekunst and Mark Murphy and Matt LaFleur and the rest of this front office and coaching staff are in a much safer place from a job security standpoint if they keep this going as long as possible. If they keep stringing this out and trying to go all in for the next couple seasons. Now, it's going to hit harder later. It is. But there's more security in this. This is never a guaranteed business, right? And the longer that you're competing, the more job security that you have. And if you can get a Super Bowl, you buy yourself a lot of job security. So trying to go all in and get that now can make sense. it's a lot easier for me to say as I sit here downstairs with a Packers poster behind me with two big lights and talking to 2,000 people on YouTube. It's a lot easier for me to say, yeah, just get rid of Aaron Rodgers. All right. My job's not on the line. Theirs is. So there's a lot more risk to going and saying we're going to sell off and we're going to try something new. There is a lot of risk in that. So that needs to be mentioned as well. And the last thing I will mention here as well is that this isn't Madden. This isn't fantasy football. There are real lives that matter here as well, real relationships. And while you can say like the general manager's job is to take a zero-sum approach and not have those things affect you, it does. It just does. This is real life. These are real life human beings. So again, I don't want to sit here and say like the things that I'm saying aren't going to affect people, because they are. And I think it's worth noting that before we jump further. All right. Now, as we transition to what I would do, what I need to mention here is that this all hinges on Aaron Rodgers, right? And why I say that is twofold. One, if he wants to retire, this all goes out the window and you have to sort of rebuild in another way. I'm of the full belief that Aaron Rodgers does not want to retire, which is why I'm going to go down this path that I'm going to go to. The second thing is that Aaron Rodgers needs to be open to the trade that you are potentially looking at as well. Again, what you have to realize, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a no trade clause, but in effect, he very much has a no trade clause, because I could say, Aaron, I'm sending you to Denver, and he could say, don't want to go to Denver. If you send me to Denver, I'm going to retire. And it's done. Like, you can't do anything more. You can say, like, Aaron, we really think this is a good fit. You can go play with Nathaniel Hackett. He said, I have no interest in playing in Denver. I don't want to play in the cold. And it's over, right? So Aaron Rodgers holds a lot of cards here as well. The other thing here is that what Green Bay could potentially get back in a trade really matters here too. If they've maybe through back channels had a couple initial conversations, I don't know, maybe Matt LaFleur and Nathaniel Hackett text on the side a little bit and say, hey, this is just between you and I, but if this goes down where, a trade needs to be made, what are we looking at here? And the Broncos are pretty set saying like, yeah, we're willing to give you pick 9 and a couple second rounders, in Drew Lock. Maybe that doesn't move the needle. It probably doesn't move the needle anywhere near enough. If that's the deal, then in that case, I'm much more likely to say, screw it, run it back. We're going to go with Rodgers, assuming that he's amicable to that. And I don't need, the number 9 pick in a couple seconds. I would rather take my shot with Aaron Rodgers and this team this year. So part of this really hinges on what you can get in a trade as well. All right, enough disclaimers. Let's get to the meat and potatoes here. The first step with Aaron Rodgers is I'm looking for that motherload deal. And I think Denver makes a ton of sense. And the deal that's sort of been discussed, maybe 3 first rounders and a couple players, that's the deal that I'm ultimately looking at and would take if Aaron Rodgers was amicable to it and wanted to do that. And if the Broncos were willing to do that, that's the direction that I would go in. And there's a couple different reasons. I think you have to look at the opportunity cost here in a couple different ways. First of all, from a Green Bay standpoint, you take all the money from the future to build this roster again this year, and you take all these resources, and you turn down a potential 3 first-round pick and a couple young player deal from the Broncos, and Aaron Rodgers goes down in week 1 with a torn ACL or gets a concussion and his career's over, or a neck injury, spine injury, something like that, and the cost is massive. You're done for the year. Your window's slammed shut. He's probably retiring, and you have nothing to show for it in return. And that is a massive, and I mean massive risk. And you could make an argument that Rodgers is probably due for some sort of injury. He's been relatively healthy. He still likes moving around. One shot here or there that goes the wrong way, and you get completely taken out of your entire plan. And there is a major risk in that. The other thing is that he could play this year, and maybe you don't win it this year. You end up with pick 28 again, in the following year, miss out on all those draft picks and opportunities to get players back in exchange. And then he retires after this season. And there's a massive cost to that as well. You don't win a Super Bowl, and now you have to start from scratch, and you're not getting anything in return. Major, major risk in both of those scenarios. The other thing is that there's an opportunity cost from Denver's side as well. All of those things that I just mentioned could happen to Denver also. And if you're getting the number 9 pick this year and 2 future first round picks from Denver. What if Aaron Rodgers goes down injured in Denver or has something happen in Denver this year where he's not able to continue for the season and they end up with a top 5 or 10 pick next year? Now you get a number 9 pick this year and a number 10 pick next year, and then it's still another future first round pick. That could potentially be franchise altering. The same thing goes with the retirement, right? Maybe the Broncos go and win a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, and next year you only end up with pick 32. But he retires after it. The Broncos are in a bit of no man's land, playing in a division still with potentially Derek Carr and Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. And they are a 4-win team the year after Rodgers retires. And then that pick 2 years from now is a top 5, top 10 pick, maybe even better than that. That is a potential opportunity as well. And to say no to all of that and have all of that risk baked into one player is really, and I mean really, difficult to reconcile at this point when you just had 3 shots with Aaron Rodgers. Well, you had a lot more than that over the course of time, but 3 shots with this team, with this offense, with Matt LaFleur, and you didn't get the job done. You won 2 playoff games in 3 seasons. That's not enough to win a Super Bowl in any one season. You have to win at least 3 games. They couldn't win 3 period in 3 seasons. So that's the reason why I'm looking to make this deal, because I just think the opportunity cost is far too much. And I don't think let's say Green Bay has 8% chance of winning the Super Bowl this year. To me, that's not a high enough percentage to risk all of that I just talked about, that you could potentially get back and start building towards the future, start getting your salary cap right, and get some serious draft equity as well as players in return. So what type of trade am I looking for here? I'm looking for 3 first-round picks, as I just mentioned, from the Broncos, Jerry Jeudy and Drew Lock. I'll get to the Jeudy and Lock in just a moment. The 3 first-round picks are paramount here because I want those opportunities. If Rodgers struggles, if he has a decline, if he retires early, if he has a major injury, I want those unprotected Denver first-round picks. If something happens to Rodgers, where those could end up being top 5, top 10 picks. That is the biggest key to me. You get the number 9 pick this year and then 2 future firsts. Those to me have to be locked in. I absolutely want Jerry Jeudy because, to me, we'll get to Devontae Adams in a second, but you need some young receiver to go with your young quarterbacks, and Jerry Jeudy is a huge key to this for me as well. I'm also very much interested in Drew Lock. I don't like Drew Lock. Let me start by saying that, because I know some of you are thinking, I don't want Drew Lock. Drew Lock sucks. He does mostly suck, all right? However, early second-round pick with high upside, and what you're willing to do is take a random gamble on a player like that, where maybe he comes to a different offense, matures a little bit later, like we've seen some quarterbacks do, maybe has a Ryan Tannehill moment, and there is enough upside there that it intrigues me. Meanwhile, him and Jordan Love are going to have to push each other in training camp to see who the starter is. Jordan Love probably wins that by default, but you're now willing to put competition to hopefully push both of those guys to make both of them better. It is a random flyer, and at worst case, Drew Lock's not a bad number 2 quarterback to have backing up Jordan Love. And who knows? Maybe you get lucky, new system, more mature, different team, different players, and Drew Lock thrives a la Ryan Tannehill, and you end up with a better quarterback out of it anyway. So that's why I want Drew Lock in that trade. And the other reason here is with Jordan Love and Drew Lock, there's one of 2 options that's likely going to happen. Either A, they're both really going to struggle, and you're going to end up with a really good first-round pick next year, which is also paramount to this, which could open up the opportunity to get a really key first-round quarterback in the future. Or one of them actually steps up and is good, and you have a team around them that maybe, just maybe, could win the NFC North, and you're not turning down that either. All of a sudden, one of them's good, and you have a playoff run with this young team and young quarterback while you have a bunch of first-round picks coming in the future. Okay, there's no downside there. So either they're both bad and you're bad enough to sort of do a full restart and go in a different direction at quarterback, or maybe, just maybe, you actually hit on one of them and it ends up being even better. And now you have a crap ton of draft capital with a good young quarterback and a young nucleus of players around them with a reset salary cap. Sign me the heck up. So I'm even willing to get all of this, to get Judy and Locke and 3 first-round picks, I'm willing to throw in some potential third-round draft picks in there as well. If Denver's saying like, hey, this is just a bit too much, I'm willing to sort of recompensate them. I want those Denver first-round picks. I want Judy to anchor my wide receiver core moving forward, and they don't care about Drew Lock, so you don't need to throw in anything. They'll easily throw in Drew Lock in the deal. I'm not concerned there, but that's the ultimate deal that I'm looking for. All right, now let's quickly go through position by position. Aaron Jones, and at the running back position is mostly going to stay. My goal with Aaron Jones is to not restructure his contract so that you can move on from him in 2023. You can't really do anything in 2022. Likely they would have to restructure him anyway, especially if you're trading Rodgers to get under the cap in time, and it gets very convoluted very fast. Go back to listen to Ken Ingles and I if you want a better breakdown of that. But my goal would be to not restructure him so you can move off of him easier in 2023. At wide receiver, I am letting Davante Adams walk. Now, if there is a way and a possibility where you can tag and trade him, obviously, of course, I'm going to do that. But with keeping Aaron Rodgers past the time that you need to do the franchise tag and everything like that, it just gets very, very, very complicated to tag Davante Adams and trade him. So I think in this scenario, you're going to have to let him walk, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to get back a future third-round pick next year in as a compensatory pick. I'm okay with that. I don't love it. I would love to do a trade, but based on where you're at in the salary cap, I think that just needs to be a necessary sacrifice in making sure that you can trade Rodgers and get the motherload deal from Denver. So if that's the case, I'm willing to, again, getting a third round back in exchange. I'm also willing to put that third round pick that you're going to get from Adams, again, in the deal for Denver if you need to do that. But we'll see. And again, if you can tag and trade him, add him in the Broncos deal, whatever you need to do, fantastic. But it just becomes very complicated. Either way, Davante Adams would not be back at the price that he's looking at. I would put the right of first refusal on Allen Lazard, which very much means that another team could make an offer for him and he could walk. I'm okay with that. I'm going to let MVS walk. I'm going to release Randall Cobb, and not that it matters, but I'm going to bring back Equanimous St. Brown on a cheap deal. More to come on that in another episode, probably sometime this week. At tight end, I'm going to see if I can get Robert Tonyan back cheap on a sort of prove it type deal. If I can, great. If not, no worries. Robert Tonyan would leave, and I'm going to release Mercedes Lewis. Offensive line, I'm going to release Billy Turner. If Denver would like him in the trade with Aaron Rodgers, they are more than welcome to have him included in part of the deal. Otherwise, we will come to terms with his release. Let Lucas Patrick walk. I would consider bringing back Dennis Kelly. More on that just a little bit later. I would release Dean Lowry. If they wanted to keep him, I'm okay with it where he's at with his contract, but I would move on from Dean Lowry. I would release Adarius Smith, release Preston Smith. I'm letting Devondre Campbell walk. This is an interesting one, and I want to go over this in a little bit more detail. I love Devondre Campbell. I would love to have him back. Here's where I talked about windows earlier and why this is so important. If you're doing all the things that I'm mentioning here, your goal is to open up a window in, 2024 at the earliest, 2025, 2026. Devondre Campbell is going to be 29 in July. That means in 2024, 2025, let's say 2025, he's going to be 32. He's not going to be playing in his prime. You're probably not even signing him to a deal that long out. So why are you giving this player that much money for the next 2 years when you know you're not competing for a Super Bowl anyway? So as much as I would hate to lose Devondre Campbell, I'm letting him walk in free agency knowing that I'm going to get either a third, probably a fourth, but maybe a third depending on what he gets, probably a fourth round pick as a compensatory pick next year in the draft. Same thing with Rasul Douglas, but he's going to be only 27, so it depends more on his price. I actually am leaning towards keeping Rasul Douglas. It sounds like he's not going to break the bank. I'm going to probably lean towards keeping him because I think you can keep a really good secondary together, and I think that can be a strength that you can actually sort of build around. I'm going to extend Jair Alexander to a massive deal, let Kevin King and Chandon Sullivan walk. Adrian Amos is an interesting one if you want to keep here. I'm okay, but again, same thing as Devondre Campbell. If you keep him and keep him on the roster, there's savings to be had now. And I just, you're not opening a window up soon enough where Adrian Amos is going to matter in that window. So I'm leaning towards letting him walk in that situation. I'm going to bring back Corey Bojorquez because he's young enough. I'm going to release Mason Crosby. All right, so those are the big deals that I'm making. I'm basically gutting this team of any of the excess salary cap stuff and starting that process of getting back under the salary cap and getting into a better place holistically from a salary cap standpoint. So that would leave me with draft picks with the 9th overall pick this year, as well as the 28th overall pick. So this is where I'm also getting interesting here. I'm going to desperately, and I mean desperately, try to pull off a Jair Alexander Saints deal that Brian Gutekunst did, 3 years ago now, where he had a top 12 pick, moved all the way back into the 30s and picked up a future first round pick where they eventually got Darnell Savage. And there's 2 teams that I'm desperately trying to target here. The Pittsburgh Steelers at pick 20 or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at pick 27. If I can trade the 9th pick overall for either the 20th pick to the Steelers or the 27th pick to the Bucs, hopefully one of those 2 teams trading up to potentially get a quarterback, because they're both going to probably need a young quarterback with Roethlisberger and Brady gone. If I can pull off that trade, and now you have 2 teams that don't have a quarterback who are probably going to struggle this year, the quarterback class isn't that strong, so it's unlikely that they're going to draft somebody and all of a sudden be great. And now either of those teams could struggle and you could end up with a really good pick in 2023. I am desperately, and I mean desperately, trying to trade back with any team, frankly, from 20 to 32, that I can get that pick in the first round and a future first round pick. And again, if I have to deal a 4th round pick, 3rd round pick, something to get that as well, I am all in that scenario. So that is desperately my goal. There's no guarantee that option will be there, but I'm desperately going to try to make that happen in any way possible, pick up a future first round pick. So that would leave me, if possible, with 2 late first round picks this year. More on that in just a moment. But next year, I would potentially have 3 first round picks. The Broncos pick, the Packers pick, which could be pretty poor depending on how they perform this upcoming season after nuking the team, and your first round pick from the Steelers or Bucs or whoever for them moving up in the draft this year. That could be used potentially next year if need be to trade up and get a quarterback, or if Love or Locke turn out, really bolster the youth of your team. You also have an additional 3rd round pick from Devontae Adams as a compensatory pick. You potentially have a 4th round comp pick for Devondre Campbell. You could get a couple other comp picks too, depending on what happens. And you have the ability to massively rebuild in 2023. And oh, by the way, still have 2 first round picks in 2024, including the Packers and the Broncos there as well. The amount of insane draft capital that you could get by maneuvering the draft in a couple different ways, trading Aaron Rodgers, hopefully getting those 3 picks from the Broncos, you have a real opportunity come 2025, 2026 to have a really impressive window open. So where would that leave Green Bay this year? Remember, they would have just this year to sort of bolster this team as well. They would still have 2 first round picks, a 2nd round pick, a 3rd, 2 4ths, a 5th, and 3 7ths. You'd have 10 total picks going into the draft and 4 top 100 picks. And your roster going into that draft, trying not to spend really any money in free agency, would be Jordan Love and Drew Lock at quarterback, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon at running back, Jerry Jeudy, Equanimeous St. Brown, Amari Rodgers, with the goal to very much target wide receivers in the draft to help that position out. Maybe Bobby Tonyan and Josiah DeGuara at tight end, Dominique Daphne as well, Tyler Davis. Offensive line could potentially go Bakhtiari, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, Royce Newman, and Elton Jenkins. And then again, while Jenkins is out, I think a Dennis Kelly supplementing that spot on a cheap deal makes sense. So your young quarterbacks don't have to deal with poor offensive tackle play. You'd still have Josh Nijman as a option there as well. If he wants to, if you want to move him to right tackle, still have Jake Hansen as depth on the interior. And then you probably look to supplement that in the draft as well. Your defensive line would be anchored by Kenny Clark and TJ Slayton. Your edge rushers would be Rashawn Gary and almost massively huge odds for a first round pick towards an edge rusher to pair with Rashawn Gary. Linebackers would be Chris Barnes, probably another linebacker in the draft. Corner would be Jair Stokes and Rasul Douglas. Safety would be Savage, and probably another opportunity to upgrade the spot next to Savage in the draft as well. Boho at punter, Molson at kicker, literally anyone different at long snapper. And I'm okay with that roster going into 2022. Is it going to be painful? Probably at times. Do I think that team could be sneaky competitive? I do. I actually really do. They'd have to have a really good draft. They'd have to supplement and get some low risk, low risk, maybe high reward free agents to pay off like they have with Rasul Douglas and Devondre Campbell. But I think there's an opportunity to make that team actually like sneaky successful while still having a ton of draft capital going in the future. Ultimately, that would be my plan going forward for the Packers. I think it's the most financially stable. I think it gives you the most opportunity at long-term success. I think it gives you a ton of opportunity if Jordan Love and potentially a Drew Lock fail to really quickly go in a different direction and use all that accumulation of draft picks that you have to move up aggressively in a draft and go grab a new franchise quarterback if needed. And, eventually build this team around all those picks and eventually the free agent cap space that you have, probably not in 2023, 24, but again, in 25, 26, you're going to have a windfall of salary cap space. You're going to have a ton of draft picks, a ton of young talent. And if you can get that right, you would be shocked. And I mean shocked at just how quickly you can reopen up a 5, 6, 7, maybe even longer year window with another opportunity to win a championship in Green Bay, arguably better than anything that you could put on the field with Aaron Rodgers and this current setup that you have going into 2022. Is there a ton of risk involved in that? There is. Could it go horribly wrong? Yes, we all overvalue draft picks, and all of those draft picks could turn out being the next Jason Spriggs and Justin Harrell and Oren Burks and Kyrie Thornton and et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be some rough picks. There's going to be some rough days. There's going to be some rough games. But I ultimately believe, if you trust the process and you trust your scouting staff and you trust your GM's ability to find talent, I think your opportunity to go win a championship is much greater going that way than just trying to run things back when you haven't been successful these past 3 seasons. Is it an easy decision? It is not. Would I understand if Green Bay did a complete 180 of everything that I just said and did everything they could to go all in this next season? I would. Would I understand if that's what you listening would like to do as well? Unequivocally. It's not an easy decision. And like I said, there is no perfect answer here. There's no perfect calculus to say, if you do this, then good things will happen. They could go all in, you could have a Rodgers injury, and it could all blow up. They could go all out, and they could fail in the draft, and everything could blow up. They could go all in, and they could win 2 back-to-back Super Bowls with Aaron Rodgers these next couple seasons. They could go all out and get their next franchise quarterback, or Love or Locke could shine, and all of a sudden you're looking at a dynasty that opens up a major window for 7 to 8 years. There's good and bad to both sides. There's no silver arrow. It's just going to be really interesting to see what Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball and Mark Murphy and Matt LaFleur and everyone in the Packers organization decides. And that's what's going to make this next month and a half, 2 months, including the draft, etc., so incredibly exciting one way or the other, because literally the future of the Green Bay Packers hinges on this offseason in a massive, massive, massive way. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate it. You're welcome that I'm not general manager. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.